I will introduce our first speaker, or we're going to have a Q&A with Gerhard, who is the CEO and co-founder of Ableton. And Gerhard is a person who has been, I would say, revolutionary and very influential on me and the way that I try to run the audio programmer. And I think that he has been influential as well, and a positive influence for many people within the industry. And I'm very privileged to have him here. So welcome, Gerhard. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you very much. I think a great place for us to start would be for us to just discuss your beginnings, how you got into music tech, how Ableton started, and how those first ideas formed. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's been always, I think, more about, personally, more about making instruments rather than making music. Somehow, I think that's maybe more the engineering gene or something. But I was lucky to be drawn into actual music making for real and quite intensely during the 90s. That's after the wall came down in Berlin, and there was like ample opportunity for really everybody to do kind of anything they felt they wanted to do, including like setting up a venue, a club to play, and do as you felt fit. And so we were lucky to be, I guess, thrown into this time and place, and to have like that kind of liberty to play and explore music, and to not have a ton of pressure in terms of career and so on, but to essentially approach the whole thing from a completely naive place, as in, so this thing, electronic music, let's do it. And we were completely unblessed with deeper knowledge, and quite sort of gang-ho about it, and made music, and somehow got more into the process and introspecting on the process of how we did it, and realized that a lot of what we were doing wasn't really well, I guess, matching the kinds of tools of the trade. At the time, that's basically Pro Tools. That's what you use on a computer. And we felt that somehow this paradigm that's implemented in like the traditional DAW is very close to, well, unsurprisingly, the traditional studio. So it's tape and mix boards and so on. And somehow that didn't have so much to do with how we happened to make music, which was much more, I guess, improvisatory or jamming, and essentially making the music while you listen to it. And sometimes with an audience next to you, and sometimes not. But I think that whole process lent itself to a different kind of tool. And so we ended up making these tools in Max, and we programmed our own way out of it, so to say, but found traction. Like, some people were curious, like asking, what are you doing there? How do you do this? And so it kind of became apparent that there was maybe more interest in this kind of way of making music and the tools that would be needed for it. And I think then that kind of led automatically into becoming more interested in making a tool that has a more widespread audience, perhaps. And I think, as so often, a lot of what happens in life is accidental, and it's typically about who you meet. So I think for us, a lot changed when I met Bernd, who is my co-founder, who is a very straight up software engineer, not from a music background, but very excited about music. And it was with Bernd that, I guess, the whole idea of making a real serious software program became a more tangible reality. And then we kind of clicked and decided to try this and venture into something new. And we got a little government grant to start, and could start, and one step led to another. But so the genesis of it really is around a very personal need that we found in making music, and then the kind of coincidence of other people also needing something like that. And I think that's a common pattern that many of you will have encountered too. You start making something that you actually need, and that's your motivation.
Amazing. And there are so many threads that I could go off on that. One thing that I wanted to step back to was talking about the situation in Berlin with the fall of the wall, and some of the way that you described it really made me think of New York City in the early 80s with hip hop, and how there was maybe some social and political tension that was happening, and that caused some type of creative abundance that sprouted into something new. Do you think that that there's something that's in that these social tensions and political tensions really help really spark that creativity into new realms?
Yeah, I guess that can happen. I don't know if there's any like sort of deeper and definite logic to it. I can say for the one like serious revolution that I experienced in my lifetime, what I can say is I think the vacuum that followed it was powerful. It's not like, people stage a revolution and then they have a plan that they pull out of the drawer on what's going to come next. And I think what we benefited from during this time after the wall fell was a lot of this like, okay, so what now? It's like a moment of limbo. Also, the money doesn't know what to do with the situation yet. In the beginning, Berlin was quite poor and remained poor for quite a while. And it wasn't like, oh, now capitalism is going to embrace this reunited country and it's all going to be a party. There was a lot of confusion, and it took a lot of time, like many years, a decade basically, for the money to figure out what to do about all of this. And during the time, there was a lot of vacancy and a lot of unclarity, and a lot of unattended property also. You could literally open up a club by just taking up the space and doing it, and maybe you will be thrown out a couple of weeks later, but never mind, you open another one. It was very much a playground, really.
And it seems like you were looking to capture some of that essence, perhaps in live, when some of that unpredictability and some of that playgrounds and spontaneity that may have been lacking in other DAWs at the time. Would you say that was where you were looking to go with that?
I mean, it's not like an intention that is foundational to what actually happened, but I think in a post hoc kind of way of explaining what happened, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's also a characteristic time, at least as we were concerned, of utter disinterest in anything like, doing the thing that you're supposed to do. For example, as a young person, venture into a career or make some money, or like all of these things were kind of completely irrelevant. Nobody cared. Also in my circle of friends, I didn't know anybody who ever talked about money. It was just somehow you made the ends meet, and it always worked in some way with, a little job here or there. And I have to say I was very privileged because I was at university. And at university, I had a really nice job in the electronic music studio, which existed. But take that. I mean, this is a technical university and they have an electronic music studio. They still do. That's Berlin. It's amazing. We had like an incredible situation to be creative and explore.
So once you got your grant and you agreed to start this company, one question that I've always thought about is, expansion. So had you ever run a business before? How did you learn? I imagine there was a lot of on the job training there.
We had no bloody idea about business at all. And I mean, in many ways, I still don't. I can't read a balance sheet. I'm totally dependent on people with economic expertise. I think you learn on the job for sure. It's crucial somehow in the beginning to find the right people who master it. And I think we were just really eminently lucky. After Bernd and I got together and we founded, it was very clear that we needed somebody who has economic expertise. And we set out to find someone and found a friend, basically, Jan. And with Jan started, I guess, the proper company as a economic entity, with seeking investment and closing a round, etc. And it became from there on like a real, I guess, workplace. Mm-hmm. So that's essential. It's something that I've always found a need for a complementary competence that I know I don't have.
Amazing. And as you were starting the company and as you were starting to hire more people, one thing that I think about when I think of Ableton is a company that seems to be very in tune with a higher sense of purpose and values and responsibility. Is that something that you really thought about from the outset? And what were some ways that you were able to, if so, what were some ways that you looked to instill that within the company from the very start?
I think I'll be careful in claiming a lot there. I think, again, a lot comes from the blissful naivete in how we approach the whole thing. And as I said earlier, it was never about, we will conquer a market. Like that whole paradigm was completely outside our scope of discussion. I think it was always about music. So we have this, we found a thing that actually works, and it's inspiring to other people. Let's go there and let's explore and dig deeper and, fail and try again. And it was always about the actual thing that we do and the people that it actually serves. So I think that came right from the beginning, and maybe that ethos that I described earlier that we grew up in simply. And I think it's a result of like a great place of privilege, I should say. And I think then furthermore, I think we were incredibly lucky in how we were able to see the company grow and succeed to the point that it is now. And I think that all confirms a sense of, wow, we have, a great responsibility now. We have a lot of people who look at us and who, we should have good answers for what they ask. We should have, we should live up to this like big responsibility. So this is a big part of our everyday conversation, and it's difficult to even set clear boundaries to, where does politics stop and where does the company begin? These boundaries are not easy to maintain. I mean, in this day and age, for sure, they're not. And there's a lot of, I guess, stance to be taken. And we try to, to do the right thing, basically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. How do you, because Ableton has over 400 employees now, right? And how do you keep the pulse of the company with so many people working there? How do you keep a general direction, and how are you able to see if things are maybe going off course and course correct those things?
It's been very difficult during the pandemic, I should say. I think a lot of what you actually sense is between the lines and is at the water cooler, and is I realized even by just observing people walk by, there's a deep communication going on in some way, and it tells you something about where's this person at. What's their state of mind right now? And all of this, I think, happens without a lot of conscious involvement. I think a lot of this communication happens somehow subconsciously. So that's been missing, and I think we've also seen some consequences of that deficit. Like a typical kind of thing that then happens in as a consequence is that a conflict blows up all of a sudden in one corner of a team where you never thought there might be one, and it's just, I think, a result of this, I guess, lack of transparency that's been going on. Mm-hmm. But I mean, what you are raising there is a big issue. There's among 500 people, there's a lot going on, and you cannot hope to know all of it. And it's a very special kind of challenge to still kind of tap the streams of information that are there. It's necessary because these are essentially your sensors. These are your eyes and ears, and there's all the information that you can possibly want available right there in front of you. Just how do you get it? How do you filter it? How do you ask for it? Sometimes people are very forthcoming, and sometimes they feel shy or they don't want to come out and say what they have to say, even so it's so important. So it's very tricky, becomes naturally more tricky with growth.
So we do have a few quick questions from the chat about kind of the early days of Ableton. Filippo Guda is asking, is it true that the first version of Live was written in Max, or is it just a legend?
It's a legend. So I think what this refers to is there was a patch called the PX18 for some reason that Robert Henke put together. And I think in some way it pioneered what became session view in Live. So the idea was, okay, we're going to play a show and we want to bring some materials. Unlike the shows before, where we didn't even bring materials, we made them on the spot. So this one was quite advanced to like, hey, we will prepare this time. And now we will need something that will let us perform with this material that we brought in a way that's not like playing back tape. And so we came up with this idea of like these reconfigurable blocks, clips basically. But if you look at the patch, it doesn't look anything like Ableton Live. It had somehow a little bit of a conceptual, I guess, it was a bit of a conceptual precursor to it.
Right. Can I ask another quick question from the chat, which is a little bit off topic, but kind of touches on these early days in Berlin, I guess. The question is whether you have any favorite early German EDM tracks that still inspire you today, kind of from that time.
Yeah. Okay, so German, actually. I mean, you know, the specific sub-community within the early Berlin electronic music scene that I would say we grew up in was the basic channel community. So that's the kind of music that was the reference for us. And Mark Anestis and Moritz von Oswald, basically the folks who did this music, were our heroes, total heroes. And we were lucky to just know them through chance encounter and mutual friends. And they were incredibly important and also supportive. So they, you know, I'm so lucky that I knew these people and that they took the time to talk to us, you know, and deal with us and put our records out on a little label that they made for people like us. Isn't it incredible? These were so important people and still do amazing stuff.
Amazing. One question that I get asked quite often is about hiring. So some people ask a lot of questions about how to get hired at a place like Ableton. We had Spencer Rudnick on the channel last year, and they said that they didn't actually know C++ when they were hired for the live team. And people hear stories like that and they wonder, well, what is it that makes a person right for Ableton? And I'm wondering if I could ask you that.
I'm not sure I'm in a great place to answer that, to be honest, because it really depends on the kind of context that, you know, the person is looking for. So, okay, now this is a meetup for folks in audio programming. And I think when it comes to basically everything around engineering and perhaps UX and design, I think there's a few things that I can maybe share that are generalizable. I think nowadays teams are looking much more beyond the actual, how do you call it? I guess the hard competency or something. So of course, they will make darn sure that they actually hire the competency that they need, but they will not stop there. And then there's a lot of care taken for the other factors that play such a huge role in making this work in light of the fact that it's always in some kind of group constellation. There's really not a lot of things you can do entirely alone in Ableton. Sometimes that's also been a problem that's been recognized because it can be stressful for people to not be left alone and do their thing. It's a nut that we maybe can crack at a point, but as it stands, most of the work is happening in a team context. And it's really important that you have, you know, a person who's, I guess, bringing the kinds of non-coding competencies that calls for. And it can be very different, you know, this could be also entirely dependent on where the team actually is, you know. Sometimes the team may say, you know, we need somebody who's very much unlike us in here because we are too homogenous in this group. And nowadays people have a lot of awareness of this kind of often sort of invisible limitation that they live with and want to break through and, you know, open up to something new and some kind of different influence. And then that can look many ways, you know, and it could be, you know, looking for someone who has a different type of character or a different type of background or something. And then all these factors then play into the actual recruiting.
And how important do you think that it is to have that different viewpoints within your company? Because I've seen so many times as a person who does recruiting for several audio music tech companies, the profile is typically the same: C++, 5+ years, you know, experience with audio development frameworks. How important is that in terms of the ethos of your company, and how does that manifest itself beyond just how well you can code? I know that might be a very difficult question to answer in a couple words.
Yeah, it is indeed a difficult question to answer in a few words. I think maybe one aspect of this would be, I think one has to watch out for like these how do you call them, folklore or something, like about the how many years of C++ somebody needs to have under their belt, presumably. Maybe that's all just not true, you know. Like as Spencer mentioned, it didn't seem for some people that we know quite well to be that kind of limitation. In fact, it wasn't so hard for them to onboard to, I mean, a different programming language. It's just that it's only that. It's a different programming language. It's not a holy grail. And then I always felt there's a lot of emphasis on these kinds of formalities when really what you're communicating in writing a computer program isn't, as I see it, isn't so much an intention towards a computer. You communicate an intention towards another human. That's the person who comes after you or who wants to look at what you've done and make sense of it. And that's the hard part. So how can you be clear? How can you state your intention as clearly as possible? And that's, I don't think so much dependent on whatever programming language is at play. These types of difficulties of how to express yourself clearly are also found in written text. I'll say if somebody is a fantastic writer, perhaps they're also somehow genetically disposed to be great programmers. I don't know, but I often found the focus on the machine is somehow wrong. We should be focusing on the programming as a human interaction.
So it sounds like there's a common connection between what your team may look for in engineers and what you look for as a company, which is connection to other people, the importance of teamwork, the importance of seeking a connection in other humans and facilitating expression. Would that be fair to say?
It's I guess it's quite a sweeping generalization, but I buy in. Yeah, I think there's something there. I mean, ultimately, every organization is some kind of, I guess, miracle of communication, and that makes the whole, I guess, the whole topic of bringing people into an organization and somehow setting it up so that people can together make something awesome happen. Very much, I guess, about communication, the ability to communicate, the desire to communicate, the openness, even this, maybe the habitus, the assumptions that go into the communication is so fundamentally important.
So sorry, I think I have a question from the chat, which I think works really well with this theme of kind of communication within a company that we were just talking about. So on the YouTube chat, Ali Somai asks, were there actually any positive consequences for the whole company going remote, obviously because of what we're going through right now?
Definitely. Some people just totally loved it, but other people really hated it from the depths of their guts. It, again, is a very different situation for, folks who just moved from, some different continent to Berlin into a job that kind of is virtual, and that's a terrible situation. And for other people, typically those who have been there for a while and who are, have an established life somehow, it's often been a dream. Like they rub their eyes and they can't believe how wonderful this is now. And then sometimes some people found the communication easier this way. They found it more effective, more efficient, more fun, and others not. It's very interesting.
And do you think that heading into the future, where do you think companies like yourselves are heading? Is it going to be a hybrid between a remote and in-office approach? Is that where you're looking at going? Because it sounds like you've expressed a lot of value in being able to have those water cooler talks and being able to pass people in hallways. Yet there are definite advantages to remote working as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it will be a hybrid, and I think the exact shape and the gestalt of this is something we have to figure out. We haven't figured out. I mean, it's a total work in progress, like it is for everybody pretty much. And I think it will be a long learning process. But for sure, there's a great, somehow a great juxtaposition of what was close became a little more far apart, but what was far apart became much closer. Like, for example, our colleagues from Cycling 74, who have always been working in a distributed manner, have been parts of our all hands meetings, and it's wonderful. And it's like kind of these boundaries became less of an issue. So we welcome it very much.
Amazing. And do you have any advice that you would like to give for anybody who's seeking to start up their own company? They're several people watching who I'm sure already run their own independent company or looking to start as independent plugin developers. Would you have any advice that you could pass on to them? Any helpful hints?
There's many topics involved, of course. I think maybe I would be trying to convey something that's important from my own reflection. But again, I can't know how generalizable it is to other people. I think what I have somehow understood much later in the game is that there's a specific role to be understood as a founder, which is kind of a vulnerable role, where you are maybe a little bit like an artist, a musician, in complete charge of the big question of why. Why are we doing all of this? And this is nothing that I think in honest reality, anybody ever really knows. It's something that you find out and become ever better at knowing what it is that actually motivates you and what your actual idea is about. You never know this completely well. And then, of course, over time, it also changes a little bit as you learn and as you grow. And this is a very delicate, vulnerable place that I think requires the founder or founders to be, how do I say, protective about in the right way. So, for example, I have in the beginnings often been naive in putting a big responsibility on somebody who just came through the door and telling them, hey, you figure this out, I'm sure, you know, and then maybe that doesn't happen in the way you thought. And I feel in hindsight, I should have been much less confused about what it means to involve people in the right way and get their participation and even, you know, venture into a more democratic way of running an organization, and the sense of authorship that you need. And that is, I think, unique and special and something you have to be, I guess, treating with great care. You are, as a founder, you're an author. You write the book. And if you write the book, or if you write the symphony or whatever it is that you're writing, you will be always careful in when do you play the music to somebody else to listen to, when do you give somebody the book, the script to get feedback. These are delicate things to be, I guess, yeah, you have to deal with these things with care. It's like you have to be a bit watchful of your own psyche in this.
I was going to ask. It sounds like a very big responsibility, and one question that I had was about work-life balance for you. Do you find yourself to be a person that sees the importance of that and being a 9-to-5 person, or do you feel that as a CEO that it's your responsibility to be the first in the door and the last out the door? Do you work on weekends? How do you balance that for yourself?
Now, I think in the beginnings, it was a situation like work was life and there was nothing else really. I think this is also okay. You can do that for a couple of years if you are young, I guess, and healthy or something. So there's a pocket for this in life somehow, but then you have to leave the pocket. And I think for me, it's been a decision really, what coincided with having a child. And it was very clear for me that I want to be around. And I limited my work times actually. So I'm not even full-time these days. I work 32 hours. It's not always actually coming around to that. So I'm not totally strict, but I try, you know, and I have 2 afternoons in the week with my son. It's not the weekend, and I have a weekend too. And I'll make damn sure that that's how it continues to be. And I will
Wow.
also support everyone in my company who wants to take that path, and just trust that it will be better for them and consequently better for Ableton.
Amazing. And do you find, who do you look for inspirations to grow as a CEO yourself? Do you read books? Do you look to certain resources to grow and to keep expanding as a CEO? And if so, where do you look to?
Oh, yes, a lot of reading indeed. And the reading, oh man, it's been all over the place. I'm a bit of a, I guess, all over the place reader of philosophy, but also I can see a lot of parallels with what's going on in politics in greater society, with what's going on inside an organization. And as mentioned before, like these boundaries are really hard to maintain these days. People are highly politicized, so they bring this in no matter what. And I think it also is I don't believe in keeping it out all the way. It doesn't make sense. I think organizations are part of societies and they have to play a role beyond their actual purpose. Like, ours has a lot to do with music and culture and empowerment of creative people. But beyond that, we're also an organization where people go to work every day, and that's part of the fabric of society, and politics play into it, and we play into the politics. So I do a lot of reading about politics too these days. And as for developing, competencies as a CEO, etc., a lot of it comes down to coaching. And I have been very lucky with having had great coaches all along. And I also would advise everybody to use that kind of resource.
Amazing. I have one more question, then I'll turn it over to Timur because I know that he'll have some more questions as well. In terms of politics within the workplace, how do you handle that? Do you let that manifest itself autonomously and let that settle out organically, or do you feel the need to step in and help manage that? How do you work with that?
It's a dance, I think. I don't believe in either extreme. So there are some companies that will say, look, our purpose is as follows, and everything else is not our purpose and therefore to be kept out of the workplace. I think that's one extreme that I find difficult. And the other extreme would be whatever comes up, whatever, activism people bring in, let them have it and let's see whatever happens as a consequence. And I think that's wrong too. And I think how you are on that side is that you can easily get to a place where people actually walk out with hurt. And I feel some responsibility for the well-being of people, and you have to stay on top of, again, the communication there. And it's delicate. What's the kind of intervention from the top? That makes sense. What we are now trying to do is to actually learn as an organization the high art of dialogue. And it's like a thing. We try to learn how to dialogue. And it's a group setting, and luckily you can read up a lot about it. It's something that people have tried for a long time. And how can you have as a group, potentially large group, a kind of exchange that goes beyond the exchange of arguments for the sake of winning the argument, but that goes towards putting our brains together so that we can think better and that we can think in a way that we couldn't think alone. And I can just say, wherever I see that work, that's the magic. That's why you have organizations, actually. So I think whatever people bring in from the outside, if you can somehow make it part of a dialogue that makes everybody walk out smarter, it's great. but that's a challenge in itself. Like, it's definitely nothing that I would claim we have cracked or solved, but it's something we are entirely committed to learning to get really, really good at. And then
it's an infinite challenge.
It's an infinite challenge, but I think also it's entirely in line with our purpose. I mean, mind you, we are all about empowering people to be creative and to like develop, blossom as humans. And if you think about that, how do you not make that political? How can you keep politics out of that? It's impossible. So of course, you could try to, shut out the realities of people who have been suffering or who have been, oppressed. But you will also block out an important, I guess, source of energy for everybody who's, when dealing with this, can come out smarter and stronger. So it's important to go there and deal with it.
Sounds like it comes right back to the beginning, which is that sometimes it's the tension and sometimes it's that need to come out and to express that causes the biggest burst of creativity and the biggest burst of synergy in people, not trying to dampen down the emotions and the trying to keep everything neat and outside of the workplace.
That is true, and I think it's a bit of an ask on everybody to also just endure a little bit of the discomfort that comes with it. And the discomfort looks really different for different people who are involved. But it's, I think, a bit like, hey, can we all try to be cool and not get like totally excited about this now, maybe resist the temptations to put whatever crosses our mind right now into the Slack, and I mean, basically withhold from all the kinds of behaviors that have like terrible impact on the social sphere and greater society. And all of this stuff is happening within an organization just as well. And it's a great training ground. Like, how do you contain your impulse? How can you be staying moderate and reasonable and productive and constructive? And how can you listen first and then be heard? All of these things. So I think everybody is called to up their game when it comes to, that communication.
Fantastic. Timur, I'm sure we have some more questions. Over to you. Do we have some more that you'd like to ask?
We have a couple more questions on the chat, but I would also like to ask a question myself, actually, if I may. So first of all, I actually also grew up in Berlin in the 90s. So all of the stuff that you said in the beginning, Gerhard, kind of resonates with me. That's really cool. I actually never worked at Ableton. I worked kind of at the other big Berlin music tech company, but I did meet a lot of people from Ableton. Like at conferences or at meetups. So I actually had friends whom I knew from before, and later they joined Ableton. So I met quite a few Abletonians, both privately and professionally. And I noticed something there, which is kind of from the outside view of just like meeting those people. It seems to me that how welcoming basically the culture seems to be at Ableton towards people from kind of underrepresented groups, whether it's gender, whether it's sexual orientation or things like that. Looks like you have kind of actually successfully managed to grow a team, which is kind of noticeably more diverse than I would say like the average music tech company, and kind of even like embracing this diversity kind of as a core part of your culture. And I know from my own experience that like growing a diverse team can be very, very difficult. And so I'm just really curious, like, how did you do it?
I think first things first, I don't think we are anywhere near where we need to be and want to be. I think despite a lot of progress that's been made in the last so many years, it still doesn't, I mean, in particular around engineering, etc., disciplines, it still doesn't look anywhere near as diverse as you would hope. So that's it's not a done deal by any stretch. And I think to your question specifically, I think we particularly owe pioneers. You know, there's been a few people who had incredible courage to step into these roles as the first woman, or as, you know, whatever, the first gay person, or I mean, somebody's always first, and they I guess pave the ground. There's something there that is very difficult to overestimate, what that kind of courage enables. And then it's sometimes been like these bridge builders, really. Like you just happen to find someone who is naturally able to connect, like a different, I guess, background or a different demographic that they represent with what's already there, in like some kind of way that they can still put up with the pain, because the pain is there and it must be enormous. And they endure, and then at some point it changes. The rest changes. The rest wakes up a little bit to that new normality. And then that new normality seems to become, you know, an asset that people embrace and that they want more of. And then it snowballs. So I think we owe much, I would say we owe much more to those pioneers than, you know, the leaders, the higher ups who, you know, made it happen. That's not how it is. I think we in many cases followed the pioneers. And I'm very grateful to the people who took those pains. Now, meanwhile, there's a lot more going on that's, you know, educated, informed, and I guess more formalized around how to indeed grow diversity on a team and make teams more inclusive and so on. I think we've also gotten better with, I guess, catching up with what the world knows about this, because it's, of course, not a specific challenge to us. It's a very common challenge. And again, I will not claim anything like we are there. It's a long journey.
Thank you very much, Gerhard. Are there some more questions from the chat, Teamer?
Yeah, there are quite a few. I don't think we have time for all of them, so I'm just going to pick out some. So there's one which kind of completely changes gears now and talks about technology again. But I find that actually quite interesting. So what does Ableton think about the iPad or like, you know, mobile platforms in general? Are we going to see ever something like Ableton Live for the iPad or something like that?
Yeah, you know, we have like this kind of law that we don't talk about stuff that's coming out in the future. And it's basically a result of learning it the hard way, because we've sometimes announced things and then they didn't happen for one reason or another. And it always felt like a bad taste in the mouth. So we don't do this anymore. And therefore I'll have to pass that question. I can't really go there in any like constructive way.
Yeah, thank you. I actually, this is kind of the answer I expected, but there are a couple more questions like that, so now I can just skip all of them.
I'm really sorry. I know this is boring, but you know.
Of course, people want to know. I guess they like your software. But yeah, that's totally understandable.
Managing expectations.
Yeah. Actually, one other question is kind of about kind of what you kind of do day to day. Like, what does a normal day look like for you? Is it mostly like meetings, or is it mostly like other kind of stuff? Like,
most of the day is meetings, indeed. Zoom nowadays, and it's, I'd say, like a mix. Perhaps half of the meetings are one-to-one. I sometimes work for like even a stretch of 3 or 4 hours with just a single person on something together, and I love this very much. I have been making music with Robert Henke one-to-one. I can now work with other people on on a thing one-to-one. It's like this creative dialogue that I'm really enjoying a ton. And then we sometimes do this with the executive team. So it's like 5 people where we like reserve like a block of hours to get into a topic, into like this thinking with a few brains connected as one mode. And that too, when it works, it's magical. I think it's not always, you can't always make it happen. It's something that also isn't, not every topic is conducive to that, but that's a large part of my work and some of what I enjoy the most profoundly, you know. And then there's a lot of writing. I write a lot of communication, but also a lot of like basically strategy stuff, you know. You write a document and then you get feedback on it, and then you process the feedback, and then you get a communication from someone else, like a proposal. I love them in writing, and then you think through it and you collect your thoughts and then you write your thoughts down. And it's a bit like 19th century letter writing communication. And I think somehow the pandemic has actually furthered that, where a lot more of these types of interactions happen now in writing. And I like it because it gives me more space to think. And I don't have to like have the ingenious response to like this complex topic on the spot. I can mull it over a little bit.
Thank you, Gerhard. I do have one last question for you. So, you know, it feels to me that sometimes the music tech industry is a little bit conservative in the sense that we have this paradigm of, you know, DAWs and plugins, and it's been pretty much the same since the 90s, you know. But my question to you is, what do you think of kind of new and exciting developments in music tech, some new direction that's coming from, not maybe necessarily Ableton, but kind of elsewhere in the industry? Is there any particular kind of new development in music tech that you find like particularly exciting or particularly inspiring kind of going into the future?
I really find it difficult to point at like the one thing that's been happening lately that's like, that's going to change everything, you know, that's the new paradigm or some such. Not so easy for me to single anything like that out. I mean, but there's a ton of exciting stuff everywhere. It just feels like more on an equal ground. So yeah, I would tell you, you know, if I felt artificial intelligence is where it's happening now, and that's the only place to look, and I would tell you, but I don't see it that way. I think exciting stuff is happening in a number of realms.
Thank you, Gerhard. Yeah, we do have quite a few more questions on the chat, but we just kind of don't really have time to ask all of them. So I want to apologize to everyone who's following us on the YouTube chat and asking questions that we didn't quite have time for all of them. But yeah, I hope we could ask enough of them. And thank you so much, Gerhard, for patiently answering all of these questions. Very, very insightful.
It's been a total pleasure, and I hope I didn't ramble on so much, so we could have gotten to more of the questions. But now, Timo, I have a question for you. You have to tell me what's on that poster back there.
Oh, yes. So it's actually, I am not actually at home. I normally live in London, UK, but right now I'm in Germany visiting family. And this is actually my niece's room. She's 13 and she is this like massive Star Wars fan. So she has this Star Wars themed wallpaper here. And I can actually even switch on this like weird like red light here. And there's other kind of Star Warsy stuff going on. It's actually funny because I then noticed that Josh also has a lot of Star Wars stuff going on there in his room. And actually our next guests also do have some Star Wars stuff going on there. So it seems that we have a theme here tonight, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Star Wars.
You have like a TIE fighter up there and like a Mandalorian helmet.
Yeah, R2D2. Star Wars was a very big part of my youth. Yeah, I love Star Wars. What a fantastic story. Yes, thank you very much, Gerhard, for your time. And yeah, what a privilege. This has been very insightful for me, and I hope it's been insightful for people that have been watching as well. And Thank you once again.
My pleasure.